Well, hello, and thank you for being with us today for our webinar, 7 Ways to Create More Engagement of Your Hybrid Worship. So in this world of the rapid cultural and technological changes, how do we faithfully worship and share the good news? Well, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what the future of worship and online ministry looks like in this post-pandemic world. We got our guest with us today, Jason Moore. We'll introduce him officially here in just a moment or so. My name is Phil Thompson, and we will introduce our other guest and our other host in just a moment or so. I just want to tell you that this webinar is brought to you in part by streamingchurch.tv, also in conjunction with Midnight Oil Productions. And we, streamingchurch.tv, we're a company that serves churches exclusively for over 20 years now. And our goal for this webinar is to inform you and to provide resources for you and your ministry. We've been doing that for years, and we're happy to do it. Today's webinar will include some great opportunity for some Q&A at the end with our guest, Jason Moore. And in fact, you can actually type in your questions right now in chat. We'll get to those in a little bit. I also want to remind you to set your Zoom to speaker view so maybe you can see the content a little better and see what Jason Moore will be sharing. So, let's kind of jump into this. What are we going to talk about today? What we are going to explore today? Let's just cover briefly, what is hybrid worship and why should I care? Now, what is it? Is it a Prius? But we're not sure about that. We'll find out though. How about how do we create a more intimate experience for all involved in your worship services? Also want to recognize the need for both and mindset. We also want to discuss some practical strategies for integrating both and language into your worship services, and also how to engage in real dialogue with those in person and online. I'm excited about that. And we'll also talk a little bit about where we will be going from here. So let's introduce some people here that we've got on our webinar today. Mr. Steve Lacy, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Steve Lacy, founder and CEO of streamingchurch.tv. Been serving ministries with technology for over 20 years.
All right, good deal. Michael Gray, who are you?
I'm Michael Gray. I do tech support and marketing for the company and moderate chat when we have a webinar.
All right, good deal. Glad to have you here, Michael. And as I mentioned, I'm Phil Thompson. Been working on staff with churches since the late 70s, done a lot of things from executive pastor to senior pastor. I love helping churches use technology, and that's what I do. And Mr. Jason Moore is going to be coming on. Let me tell you a little bit about Jason Moore real quickly here, and then we'll turn him loose, so to speak, on this. He's a former adjunct professor at Northwest Nazarene University. He has been pioneering the work in worship and design and guest readiness for many years now. He's the author of 12 books, and he has led and continues to lead lots of seminars and keynote addresses, hundreds of them over the years. He's collaborated with several Hollywood producers in film and television. I'd love to talk about that, but we won't have time to do that today, but maybe we'll do that in the future. And he's been featured in many articles and publications. We've had him on the Church Solutions podcast, and his latest book is Both and: Maximizing Hybrid Worship Experiences for In-Person and Online Engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jason Moore. Jason, how are you today?
Doing good. I can't complain. Just got back from vacation late last night, so you put me back to work, and I'm ready to go. So
that's right. All right. So
yeah.
Let's get you going here. You need to do whatever you need to do here. Share your screen or show us what you're going to say.
If you just end the share screen there.
Oh, that's a good idea. You don't want to. Oh, let's do that. How's that sound?
That's great. Everything will appear in my window. So hello, everyone. It is good to be with you. I've got a lot of information, a lot of things to share with you, and less time than I typically have to do that. So I'm going to try not to talk too fast, but we are going to talk about 7 ways to increase engagement in your both, what I like to call both and worship. So here's the fancy graphic for that. And so let me ask if you would, to open the chat, if you haven't already, I want to interact with you throughout our time together. And let me just ask very quickly, how many of you were online prior to the pandemic? Don't comment if you weren't, but who are our early adopters out there? Bob McKenzie is an early adopter. Harry is an early adopter. Michael, Leonard, sorry, Steve, and so on. All right, so we have some early adopters out of there. How many of you, though, went online when COVID showed up? COVID forced you online. Go ahead and put that in the chat if that's you. If you went online because something called COVID showed up and more or less forced you. Looks like Ellen and Marlo, and I'm going to assume many, many more. Well, whether you went online before the pandemic began or you went online when it happened, everyone had to make some changes when COVID showed up because we didn't have anyone in the building. And so we really had to reimagine worship for an online and, well, at that time, an only online audience. And now we face this moment that I think is critical in the life of the church, in that we've got people back in the room, but we've retained a lot of folks online as well. And if we're not careful, we can create an experience where more or less what we're doing is we're talking to the people in the room, and we've kind of forgotten about those people who during the pandemic we looked at, we talked to, we addressed directly. And so we end up without meaning to create spectators for those who are worshiping with us online. And so I want to talk to you today about how to create truly hybrid or both and worship. If we've not met, my name is Jason Moore, as you heard a moment ago. I've been in ministry for 25 years. I started at a large United Methodist Church in Ohio called Ginghamsburg United Methodist Church as a media producer and those sorts of things. And in 2020, when the pandemic hit, a lot of folks came to me looking for help for how to navigate this COVID thing and how do we do worship online. What you're going to hear today is based on my book, Both and Maximizing Hybrid Worship for In-Person and Online Engagement. If you're interested in picking up a copy, if you scan that QR code, you can get 10% off if you put in BA Webinar 10. And that'll save you 10% on the book. We're just going to scratch the surface, though, and get going. So one of the questions I've been hearing a lot recently from pastors and leaders in the church is, can we stop doing this now? And that was Princess Lang yelling what, but for some reason she was muted. And the reason that I get that question is that a lot of folks are telling me that a lot of our people are back. Can we stop doing this now? And the truth is, we can't stop doing this because this is a Great Commission moment. If you haven't really ever given much consideration to why you should be doing hybrid worship, it's the first question to start with. Why informs our what and our how, and the why has to be something more than COVID happened. Because we've got more people, more eyeballs on our worship than ever before. And so I want to talk about how to create more engagement for folks, because what we've done is we've kind of focused again on the people in the room and forgot about those online. I do want to take a quick little trip down memory lane. So many of us went online, and in those early days of the pandemic, we tried everything. So here are a few recreations of great moments in online innovative history on online worship. So the first one I like to call the cheap seats. A lot of us just threw a camera in the back of the room and went about business as usual. Some of you got the camera up closer. I call this too close for comfort. You might want to back the camera off just a hair and trim your eyebrow hairs if you're going to get the camera that close. We used whatever technology we could. I call this surveillance camera worship. I like this because it's got night vision and no one steals anything off the offering or the altar table anymore. Again, we'll use whatever technology we can. I call this one Ring Doorbell worship. You just step out on your front porch and broadcast to whoever's watching your feed. This one I call Defying Gravity. I saw a lot of church services that were upside down and sideways and things like that. But hey, we were giving it a shot. And one of the later innovations in worship is what I call Zoom filtered worship. I am not a cat. I am not a cat. I am not a cat. If you've never seen the Zoom filter cat lawyer video. Go search that one. This is over. Was a really fun video of a lawyer who was trying to argue his case in court and couldn't get the cat filter turned off. But we tried all sorts of different things to engage with people in those early days, moving the camera around, talking to the camera, and so on and so forth. And I think it's time for us to think about why we want to really double down on hybrid ministry. So let's talk about 7 ways that we can increase engagement. The first is that we want to create an intimate experience of worship for people both physically gathered and those who are gathered digitally as well. I want you to consider that you're really, when you are doing worship on a Sunday morning, you're engaging more than just the people you can see. And one of my favorite people to study, and he was way before his time, was Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was great at making you feel like you were sitting in the living room with him. He would talk to the camera. He would give you a moment to ponder what he was saying, and so on and so forth. And sometimes we don't give a whole lot of consideration to the fact that we've got people not participating with us in the room. And so it's really that you have to think in your mind's eye about those people who are not with you. So the first tip I want to give you is to get the camera closer or invest in a lens that will allow you to zoom. Too often what we have is people that are head to toe and the camera's in the back of the room, and if somebody's this big on your screen or their head is this big, imagine watching on a smartphone where you can't even make out facial features. So you've got to get the camera closer so that you can read those expressions, those facial features, and that's how you're going to create a more intimate experience of worship. Now, some of you might be thinking, I'm in a really beautiful worship space. We can't put the camera up close, or our camera doesn't zoom very much. For some of us, it's worth bringing the camera closer and the people being able to see that technology. We have to really reframe the thinking about the technology. The camera isn't a camera. It's not metal glass and microchips. It is a portal into that experience that allows people who are not physically gathered to be a part of it. So we ought to not lament the presence of the camera. We ought to celebrate it and help our people experience or see that that is an experience for people who are not with us in the physical space. So second tip I want to give you is just that eye contact really matters. If I were doing this presentation with a room full of people and I spent the entire time talking to those who are in the room and never looking at the camera, I mean, it feels kind of weird to be watching a presentation like this and I'm not addressing you, but you feel something different when I look directly at the camera and talk to you. And so one of the things that we have to do is just be mindful of the camera's presence and think of it as a seating section in your church. Most of you who preach or lead from the front, whether you're a music leader or whatever you are, a host, a liturgist, whatever you call that in your church, you're going to talk to the people over on the left and over on the right and in the balcony. Don't forget that the camera is a whole seating section. And so one of the ways that you might help yourself to remember those folks is to put a camera icon in your notes. Just put it at the top of each page in your sermon or the top of your music or at the podium or wherever you're at. That camera icon will help you to remember to look up and address the folks so they feel like you are talking to them.
You talking to me?
I'm talking to you. And by looking at the camera, it helps you to feel that. The third tip I want to give you is to go out and invest $8 or $10 in a small whiteboard. The kind of whiteboard that you'd write a grocery list on. So something like this. Write on it last week's attendance online. So what was your attendance? How many people worshiped with you online from Sunday afternoon to Saturday night the last week? I just wrote on that whiteboard, for example, 103. If I will write down 103, put it on a whiteboard and put it somewhere near the camera, I'm going to look up and look at that camera and recognize that there are 103 households that are participating along with us throughout the week. That may, for some of us, that may actually be more than are physically present in the room. Prior to this training today, as I was chatting with our hosts, they were telling me that oftentimes the people who sign up for this event in the live event are a smaller number than those who will watch this later. So when you consider that a lot of people are going to watch later, it means that your worship service can extend beyond just that time, but into the future as well. The second way that you can increase engagement is to watch your language. Language really does matter in the worship that we do. And I'm not saying that we're using foul language, but we're using some bad language, I think, when we think about hybrid. I want you to consider that there are 3 ways that people worship with you now. Right now in person, right now online, and later online. So you've got people that are right now physically gathered with you in the room. You've got people who are worshiping with you online if you live stream. And then you've got people that worship with you later online, a whole group of people that are on-demand worshipers. Most of our language is really focused on group number 1, those who are with you right now in the room. So we'll do things like say, let's stand together as we sing. Now, how many people in your living room or that are in their living room do you think are actually standing right now in that moment? Probably not very many. And what happens is that when all of our language is exclusive to the room, we create a disconnect for those who are not physically gathered with us. So if you're going to ask people to stand, you might say, if you're here in our physical space, I'm going to invite you to stand. If you are worshiping with us online right now, find a posture that will allow you to fully participate in this moment. Think about things like communion. You know, oftentimes with communion, we'll say things like, well, when you walked in today, you got one of those little packets. I call them rip and sip packets. Well, if I'm worshiping at home, no one gave me that when I walked into the room today, into my living room. So it's just by acknowledging that there are other ways that people participate, you're going to include them in the experience. Prayer, this is an important one. I will worship online sometimes with churches, and I'll hear, if you'd like to pray with someone, you can come down and someone will pray with you up front here. If I'm not worshiping in the room, that doesn't benefit me at all. But many of us have people that are hanging out in the chat. If you'd like to pray with someone today and you're in our physical space, come forward. We'd love to pray with you. If you're worshiping with us online, you can pray with us, pray with someone in the chat. And if you're worshiping with us on delay or at a later time, you can drop your prayer request in an email and someone will reach out and pray for you or pray with you this week. So just remember that there are all these different ways that people are worshiping. Find language for all 3 groups. The next thing I want you to consider when it comes to language is the temporal nature of our worship. Sometimes in the room, for those who are physically gathered, we'll say things like, good morning, welcome to worship. We're so glad you're here this Sunday morning. Well, I'm not there, and I may not be worshiping on Sunday morning. I may be worshiping at a later time. So I actually think saying good morning, welcome to worship is stronger than welcome to worship. Hope you're having a great day is better than good morning, happy Sunday, you know, those kinds of things. So be mindful of your temporal language because it can be a disconnect for those who worship at a later time as well.
Good morning. Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Thank you, Mr. Truman. There are 3 words that I want to encourage you to eliminate from your vocabulary if you're using them. Not everyone uses these words, but many do. The first word is the word watching. We don't want people to watch our worship. We want them to worship with us online. So don't say, and I hear this a lot in worship, hey, if you're watching at home today, thanks for watching our worship. We want people to worship with us from home, not watch us worship in the building. So it's a small thing, but I think it's a big indicator to those who are not with us physically. The second word is the word viewers. We don't want to think of people at home as viewers. We want them to be participants. And the only way they can really participate is for us to give them the opportunity to do that. I will hit that quickly here in a moment. And the last word is not a word that everyone uses, but it's a word that is just one of my pet peeves. It's the word virtual worship. Worship online is not a virtual experience. I, a couple of years ago, got one of those VR headsets for Christmas. And, you know, I had a lot of fun playing with it and that kind of thing. That year, my siblings and I all bought my dad one for Christmas as well. And one day he called me. He lives about 35 minutes away from me. He said, hey, I want you to download this roller coaster with me and ride it with me. And I said, okay, Dad. So we downloaded the roller coaster. We got on it. You know, his avatar sitting next to me. We're having a conversation. He's just laughing his head off. We begin to go up the hill. Now, I love roller coasters. But even on a regular roller coaster, a really tall hill might make you have some butterflies, some nervousness about that hill you're about to go over. And then, of course, when you go over the hill, you feel gravity and the wind in your face and all of those things. Well, I didn't feel any nerves going up the hill. I didn't feel any gravity. I didn't feel anything because it was a simulated experience. It's not real. Friends, worship online is not virtual. It's not simulated. It is actual worship. It is just delivered in a way that is digital. And so I would encourage you to eliminate the word virtual from your vocabulary as well. Moving on to the third way to create more engagement, create a dialogue with your congregation. I get into a lot more about this in the book than we have time to cover, but I'm just going to quickly say if you're not using the chat, you really need to lean into using the chat. And I want to encourage you to assign a chat host. I don't have time to go deep into this. You might get out your phone and snap a picture of this because I'm not going to have time to break it down. But here are some things that a chat host ought to do. Offer a welcome to everyone that comes in the chat. Take questions as they're in the chat. Reinforce what the pastor and leaders are saying. Post links to the things that you're talking about, announcements, books you're referring to, whatever it is that you're talking about. Give people an opportunity to interact. Foster reflection. So our reflection question today is, and have them put it in the chat, and make sure you mention some of those things so the people online feel like they're actually a part of it. And then the last one there, number 6, is to invite follow-up. It's really important that you are engaging with people in a way that you know who they are and that they feel like they're in a long-term or longer-term relationship. Also, remember that not everybody who worships at home is going to have the chat out, so you might invite people into what I call the dual screen experience. And that's the idea that you might say, hey, if you're on a smart TV today, I'm going to invite you to take your phone out as well and navigate to our Facebook page or to our streaming platform, or whatever you're using, YouTube or streamingchurch.tv, whatever it is that you're using, and use the chat there. And so you might even put a graphic on the screen that says mute your phone, scan this code, and that's going to give you our chat, and then chat away throughout our worship time together. I want to show you very quickly here one of my favorite churches that I visited a few years back. They're doing a great job with dialogue. It is Journey Church in Columbia, South Carolina. And when I went to their church, I first noticed this. Over on the left part of their worship space are these 3 high top tables. And at those tables sit what they call social media ambassadors. So they have these 3 tables. They're volunteers. They sit there with tablet devices, cell phones, laptops, that kind of thing. And they are engaging constantly with people in the chat. Now, this is a large African-American church. And one of the things the pastor said is so important to their identity as a church is what we sometimes call and response, that the pastor leads and the people are active throughout the worship experience. And so, that might be, amen, brother, and yelling out some things as the pastor is preaching. He said, I had to figure out how I was going to do that for people who are not physically gathered. So those social media ambassadors do a lot of the things that I put on that last graphic. When someone comes into the chat, they get a welcome. If they make a comment, they get a response. Here's a really low-hanging fruit opportunity to get people to engage in your chat. Hey, if you are worshiping with us online today and you are a member with us, put M in the chat. We want to know that you're there. If you are a frequent flyer with us, you're not a member but you regularly attend, put F in the chat or FF in the chat. And if you're a guest, put the letter G in the chat so we can welcome you. I saw them do this at Journey Church, and it immediately filled up the chat. And when the G's went in, all of the M's and the FF's were welcoming those guests and making them feel like they were part of it. They would ask questions throughout the worship experience in the chat to get people to engage. Here's what I witnessed on that Sunday. Tons of interaction. There was a dialogue happening with the people in that chat, and I started watching their worship online after I visited them in person. I went to do a consultation with them. They have somewhere between 400 and 800 comments every single week in their worship, which says that their people are really, really engaged. The second thing that they did that I thought was so important in dialoguing and helping their people connect with those not in the room is behind them there's a whiteboard back there. You see that whiteboard What they do is they write in real time the number of people who are engaged in that worship. So it started with 10, and then it became 20, and at 30, and it went all the way up into the 130s, high 130s. What that did was that it allowed the people in the room to see that there are 130 households worshiping with us right now. And it created this sense that we're all in this thing together, even if we're not all physically here gathered. It also allowed the pastor to recognize that he was preaching to more people than he could physically see with his eyes. He told me at the time that they had about 80% worshiping online and 20% in the room. It's a little demoralizing to look out and only see 20% of your people, but if you can see over on a board that the rest of your people, there 130 times 4, shows the rest of his congregation that was present. The last thing I want to show you here is just a clip from the service that I was at. They engaged so regularly with their people in worship in the chat that the pastor that morning was looking at the chat prior to going up to preach, and he saw a comment. You're going to hear him refer to Sister Sarah, and he's going to say, Sarah, when you came in today, he doesn't mean in the physical space, he means in the chat. I want you to see how he looks at the camera, how he talks to the online audience, but I also want you to see the way the room reacts when he begins to talk to Sarah, who is not physically gathered with them. So check it out. This is Journey Church in Columbia, South Carolina.
You don't have to look like what you've been through. Miss Sarah, you came in this morning and you said, Rev, the devil was riding me last week, but I already knew because I read the prayer call. And I said, Miss Sarah, your hip may have been hurting and your shoulder may have been hurting. I wish y'all were here to see Miss Sarah put the third eye on Miss Sarah, and I said, Miss Sarah, you don't look like what you've been through. You look like God has made a difference in your life. And I stopped by to tell somebody online, if you just get a little bit closer, you can see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. If you dare to get closer, just a talk with Jesus will make it all right.
Now, I told Pastor George if he could just muster a little bit more energy when he preached. That was my only feedback for him. Of course, I'm just being silly. But what I thought was so important about that moment was that it created this dialogue where somebody who wasn't physically there was completely engaged. And I'm sure that meant something to Sarah, but if you saw those people get up on their feet when he began talking about Sarah, it meant something to them too. Now, you don't have to have as fancy a setup as they have, but friends, if you will include people who aren't in the room in the worship that you do, they're going to feel connected. They're going to feel like they're a part of the dialogue. It's going to raise the morale of the people in the room if you're including people who aren't in the room. And of course, it's going to raise the morale of those who aren't in the room as well, because those people in the room know Sarah. They miss Sarah. They wish Sarah was there. And by hearing about Sarah's story in the sermon, because he saw her in the chat, it makes a big difference. The fourth way to increase engagement is to assign an online advocate. Again, I go into much more detail in the book than we have time to cover here, but I'll hit some of these very quickly. 7 things that you want the online advocate to look at. What about this experience is working and not working online? So some of the things that we do in the building don't work very well online. How do we reimagine it so that it works well for people gathered at home? Second thing is, does it feel like they're actually talking to me? And we talked about this a moment ago, but eye contact, language, those things really matter. I have one church that I worked with as a consultant where the pastor said, I really wanted to make sure I was making a lot of eye contact. So I assigned somebody to sit in the front row and to watch the stream, and they would make tick marks on a piece of paper. I said I had a goal of looking at the camera at least 15 times during worship. If she hadn't hit her marks, I don't know what the signal was, but they gave her some kind of signal, and the pastor would make sure that she would look at the camera more if she hadn't looked at it enough. So I thought that was pretty creative. The third thing is, are they using language that includes me in the experience? We already kind of talked about this. 4, can I hear and see everything? Remember, friends, that some of the things that happen in the room, when you're sitting there physically present, if somebody gets up and starts talking, you can hear them because you're in the room. But if they don't have a mic on, you can't hear what they're saying. So some of us allow people to share announcements or offer something like a prayer request or a joy or a concern, or I've heard people say spirit sightings, things like that. You've got to get a microphone out into the congregation, or at least repeat what is being said, because people who worship online can't hear the things happening in the room. Number 5, do I feel like a valued member of the congregation? Most of those things prior to this make you feel valued. Eye contact, language, being able to hear and see everything, all of those things matter. An online advocate will help you identify when you are missing those marks. Number 6, are they using the chat feature effectively? Are you using the chat feature? Make sure that it's turned on. If you're on YouTube, you have to turn the chat feature on. You have to teach people to subscribe to your channel if you want to talk to them. And the last one is, what are the next steps? Are you giving people an opportunity to check in, to engage with you deeper when that worship experience is over? Number 5, fifth way to create more engagement is to develop new rites and rituals. A lot of the rites and rituals that we do when we are in the physical space don't translate very well to at home. And so the language that we use, the way that we set up things like communion. I have been to so many online worship services where all of the language about communion is about the physical space. What about those people who are gathered with us who are not in the room and aren't going to get to come up and tear off a piece of bread and dip it in the cup or drink the cup or whatever your tradition is? You've got to think about those people. Language, again, matters. I want to show you a clip from a church here locally in my area, and I want you to listen to the language that he uses to include the online audience, but also the language and instruction he's going to give for communion for that worship service.
Welcome to Restoration Park Church Online. I'm Ethan, and I'll be your online pastor with you today. Welcome. We're really happy you're with us. You know, whether you're a part of our family here at Restoration Park Church, or you're just checking us out online, or you're just watching from a distance, we really want to invite you to be part of our service today, not just a spectator. And when I say that, like, I invite you to sing along with the worship team. I invite you to pray when we pray and listen to Chad's sermon as he preaches, but more than that, I really invite you to be ready to take communion with us. We take communion every Sunday at Restoration Park Church. And it happens, we're going to worship, and then Chad will preach, and there'll be another song, and then I'll actually be on the stage in the sanctuary leading us in communion. So I urge you strongly to have something so that you can be gathered with us in spirit and celebrate the Lord's Supper with us, whether it's bread and grape juice, or if you don't have that, a cracker will do, or any kind of drink, just so long as you can remember that with the Lord together. And this way, you're not simply watching church, but you're part of church, gathered with us in spirit into the Father's house.
So this is early in the service, and then, of course, later you have the elements that you've prepared ahead of time so that you can also be a participant. I've seen people do this with a remembrance of baptism service as well. Grab a cup of water or a bowl of water or something so that you can remember your baptism along with us as we're being baptized here today, and so on. Now, I understand there's a theological can of worms here. Some folks are not okay with online worship or online communion. So you might consider pre-blessing the elements and telling people, if you worship online, you can stop by our building this week and pick up the elements, or we'll even drop them in the mail to you. The church that I showed you a moment ago, Journey Church, they actually do a post-worship drive-by communion. The day I visited them, I walked out of the building, there were 30 cars in the parking lot. People who had worshiped online, got in their cars, came to the church so that they could receive communion that same day. But they worshiped online. So that's a both-and experience. There's also a church I'm working with in North Carolina that does something that they call their Faith Infusion boxes. And so they send these boxes out, and the box contains everything that you need to be able to participate in the worship series. And so you worship online, but you have all of these things that are physically in your possession so that you can really participate and engage in that worship. The sixth way that we can increase engagement is to just keep iterating. It is really important that we keep trying new things. In the early days of the pandemic, I saw so many people experimenting. Every week was a new opportunity to try something, and then we kind of settled into the, well, this works and this works and this works, and we just kept doing the same things over and over and over. I've had a lot of churches tell me that our online audience has started to decline, but it hasn't matched the number of people that have come back. Why is that? Well, if you haven't really done anything new and you've kind of stopped focusing on those who worship online, it makes for a much less engaging experience. So I want to encourage you to try something new. If you haven't tried anything new in a while, try something new. 2 other ways that you can continue to iterate. Number 1, once a quarter, sit down with your team and watch your worship from beginning to end. You can fast forward here and there, but you're so engaged in the development and the deployment of your worship that you don't ever even experience it. So you don't even know what it looks like online or what people are experiencing. It's really important for you to watch for eye contact and language and all those kind of things. Where do you feel disengaged? How can you improve that experience? And the second thing you can do is watch someone else's worship where you don't know anybody, maybe even outside of your faith tradition, because you'll notice all sorts of things that happen that you're like, who are these people? What is that? I don't understand what they just did. And oh wait, we do that too. Oh wait, we don't do introductions. Oh wait, we don't explain this act of worship. And it might be that you will see things in yourself by watching what someone else does. All right, and I guess we're to number 7. The last one I want to share with you is continue to cast vision for your worship. A lot of folks, we've got a lot of naysayers about hybrid worship. I heard a lot of people in the early days, well, actually pre-pandemic, who said, we don't want to do online worship because people just stay home. I had someone say to me the other day, we're going to end our online worship. I said, why would you do that? We want people to come back to the building. Well, I said to my friend, well, friend, I appreciate that. But, you know, if my favorite restaurant stops offering delivery service, tongue-tied. If they stop offering delivery service, it doesn't mean I'm going to get in my car and go to the restaurant. It means I'm going to find somebody else that offers delivery service. We've got to create more engagement in our worship. And it doesn't mean I'm never going to go back to the in-person experience, but it's really important that we think about our why. Why are you doing this? And that will inform our what and our how. I also want you to consider, if you've got naysayers, that hybrid worship is what the church was founded on. Now you might think, what are you talking about? There was no internet or anything. Paul's ministry was hybrid ministry. All throughout Acts, Paul is preaching to the people in person. He is physically gathered with them. And then he finds himself in prison and he begins to write letters. And those letters are physically distanced. They're not in the same physical space, and he is leading the church and preaching to the people from those letters. And so the other thing I want you to consider is Paul's letters were written for the time he was in, but also speak to us now. The worship that you do, because it's archived, because it's recorded, is here and there and now and later. It's here in the physical space. It's there wherever they are. It speaks to us right now as we're experiencing it on Sunday, and it speaks to us later when we experience it as a delayed recording. So think about the worship that you do as here and there and now and later. All right, friends. Well, that brings us to the end of our formal presentation here together, and we can do some Q&A. I do want to mention that if you have not ever taken advantage of Streaming Church's services, they have a great opportunity for you. They'll give you $200 for trying it out. If you go to streamingchurch.tv/Jason, you can sign up and try it out. I love what they're doing. They've been at it for a long time. They are people who really, they've been in the trenches in ministry, so they're not just a company providing services, but they greatly care about the ministry that they're doing. And so if you came here through one of my networks or you somehow found the link and you haven't ever signed up, check it out, because they are offering great things, great service, and will help you stream in an even better way. All right. Michael, do you have any questions that you've mined for me that you want to throw at me?
Yeah, I did have one that, let's see here. I have to scroll back. Give me 2 seconds.
All righty.
Marlo asked, what is your opinion on a few platforms to stream on that you might, maybe a top 2 or 3 kind of thing?
Sure, sure. Well, every platform kind of has its strengths and weaknesses, and they all do different things. So I'm a fan of multi-streaming, going to multiple different places. What I have heard many times over the last 3 years is that Facebook is great for kind of drawing in a new audience, but they're not going to necessarily stick with you for the whole service. There's too many things on Facebook that can distract us, but it's a great way to draw in people who might accidentally land in your worship. So I like having a presence there. The thing that's a little bit nicer about YouTube is that YouTube is a little bit more curated in that you don't constantly get ads and people jumping up, messages popping up while you're worshiping and that kind of thing. But of course, it's a little harder to navigate there. You have to be subscribed to chat. There's some downsides there as well. I'm a fan of hosting your worship experience on your own church's website. That's a wonderful thing. The only downside there really is that you have to get people to your church's website in order for them to be able to participate. The great thing about it though is if you can get them there, you get to control the experience. You can put sermon notes in, and you can have prayer and all sorts of things. Streaming Church just included, and maybe you all can talk about this. There's an AI bot that will actually answer some of the common questions and things that people have, which I think would enhance the experience of worship for outsiders who don't know a whole lot about your church. So I'm a big fan of multi-streaming. I know some churches that use the Church Online platform that the folks at livechurch.tv do. And I would say stream to as many places as you can handle. And of course, streaming church.tv is one of those services that I would highly recommend. So other questions?
So Jason,
yes,
you I read your book, and you made a point where you used an illustration of a NFL football game and just drawing the distinction between how they treat the online audience versus the in-person audience. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. That's I was trying to help people kind of understand how to kind of frame thinking about both and. And the thing is most of us have been to a professional sporting event before, and I think most of us would love to go to the Super Bowl someday in person. But the experience of the Super Bowl is very different in person than it is in your living room. The upside of being in the space, of course, is that you get that communal experience. You've got people doing the wave, and you've got the beer and the hot dogs, and all of those kinds of things. There's something about being at the game that is unlike being at home. But there are also advantages to being in your living room, where you have commentators that will explain that play or that call that you didn't understand, or you get instant replay, or they have graphics projected on the field, and you can always see the score, and all those kinds of things. One of the downsides of being in the stadium is that if a player gets injured, things just kind of come to a halt, and you just sort of have to wait for that to be over. Of course, if you're watching in your living room, they don't want you to turn the channel, so they're going to show you a highlights reel, or they're going to cut to the scores of other games, or they're going to keep you engaged. And so what I think we have to consider is that there are two different teams that are working in that real-time event. There are the people that are in the physical space, the ushers, the people that are helping you find your seat, security, the vendors, all of that. And they're really focused on, they're not so concerned about how many people are watching at home and what kind of TV they're watching on, those kind of things. And then there are the people that are in the production trucks and behind the cameras and the commentators and all of that aren't so concerned about the people in the stadium. They're great background for what's happening, but they're really trying to capture the game so that at home you are fully engaged in the game that you're watching, and that you're almost a participant in it in the way that you watch that. And so I think for a lot of us, we're not thinking about we're thinking about those people that are in the stadium, but we're not at all thinking about how do we make this engaging. So it's the game, it's playing out in real time, but it's being delivered in two very different ways. And you don't have to have an NFL budget to think about including people by saying, hey, if you're worshiping online, put your prayer request in the comments. And then picking up your phone at some point and saying, hey, we have a prayer request from my friend Laura here, who is, and then you share that. And in that moment, Laura lights up a little bit because she just heard her prayer request in that worship experience. All of those things really make a difference.
I never expect them to stick a static camera in the end zone and play the game,
Yes.
And it just really struck me that all the focus is, dedicated to that audience that right now in the church, I think people just think is invisible.
Yeah. I actually mentioned in the book that you'd never see the NFL stick a camera in the nosebleed seats and not pan around or anything like that. And that's what some of us do is we put it in the balcony and we're getting, the people are like, if you imagine the players running around on the field like ants, how many people would tune into games if that's what the game was? Now, the diehards, they would do it. Your people who are already members and just can't be there, they're going to watch no matter what the production looks like. But if you're trying to draw in new people, I really believe this is a great commission moment. We're to take the gospel everywhere. And now we have the opportunity to do that through online and in person. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Steve. I think that's a good way to frame our thinking about it.
Let's field a couple more questions here. And while we're getting those questions here, Jason, this has been great too, by the way. We really appreciate it. You're doing a great job. I just want to encourage people that if you miss some of this, you can always get the recorded version of it. All you have to do is send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv, and you get today's recorded webinar. We've got other webinars there as well. Just send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv, and the subject line could be hybrid worship. And also, we want to encourage you, we've got another webinar coming up next month. We do these every month, and it's August 15th. It's 12 noon Eastern time. The webinar is called Empowering Pastors with two new cutting AI cutting edge tools, technology. I don't know. I jumbled the whole thing up, but it's coming up. So sign up for it at webinar. Well, I don't think we have it available yet to sign up. Do we, Steve? It's we'll let people know about it. You're muted, but that's fine. And then we have resources. Check out our you can always go to webinar.streamingchurch.tv. You can always go to blog.streamingchurch.tv. You can always go to and search out and subscribe to our Church Solutions podcast. We've had Jason on there before. We hope to have him on again. And then, of course, Jason's organization is Midnight Productions. And so he's always got a lot of good stuff. So let me go back to any more questions here that we might have for Mr. Jason Moore. Jason, I love the whole idea about the communion box. I thought that was really very creative that people had to send people out a communion box. Who came up with that idea? I think that's brilliant.
I've actually seen a number of different churches do it. And I've seen folks after 2020 create like a Lenten box for the folks that would like to mark their head with ashes on Ash Wednesday, and they'll send palm branches out, things like that. So I don't know that one person thought of it, but I saw multiple people kind of arrive at the same idea at the same time, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other questions in chat or anything else we can hammer Mr. Jason Moore with? I also like the idea of reviewing your services. We used to call it a debriefing after we had church, and we would review our services and ask questions about that. Steve, got anything on tap here for Mr. Moore?
I am just combing through the chat, so here's your last chance. Here's one jumped in. The only other thing I want to know is how do we make AI do all this hybrid stuff for us? So
I'm working on that too, actually. My next book is on AI. I'm doing a lot of teaching on AI as well. But I did just put my email address in the chat. So if you think of a question that you have later, you didn't get it in, or you don't want to ask it in front of everybody here or whatever, feel free to message me at jason@midnightoilproductions.com, and I will be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Give us a little more of a teaser on this AI for doing worship.
Well, I have been working on how to develop a series using several different tools, and there's if y'all haven't used ChatGPT is this incredible large learning language model that really it isn't doing it for us, but it will greatly assist us in creating content. And so actually, I've spoken at a couple AI conferences, the AI Expo recently with Kenny Jang. I showed how to create a worship series using ChatGPT to help write the series and outline the script, but then using a program called Midjourney to create all of the images. So to create scenes of Jesus miracles. And then I used another app called 11 Labs to create a voiceover for that. So I create a little bumper video. In fact, if I had it, well, I can actually show you the bumper. Give me just 2 seconds here, and I'll show you. This was created completely with AI. Give me just a second. I wasn't planning to show this, but I'm going to show it now. So what you're about to see here, AI wrote the script. AI provided the voiceover. I actually used a program to generate the music track as well, and then I assembled it all in a video editing program. But everything that you'll see here is AI.
In a world where hope was born in the humblest of places, a man emerged, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. With a mere touch, scarcity became abundance. The impossible became possible. In the face of turmoil, he commanded peace. And in the shadow of death, he brought life. Beyond belief, the miraculous story of Jesus. Witness the miracles.
So the AI actually came up with that title. I gave it some parameters. I told it what I wanted to create. I said I want to create a 6-week series based on the miracles of Jesus, starting at his birth and going through his death. Help me do that. And it outlined all of these different texts. I said, help me write a bumper script for this, and it wrote every word that you just heard. I then plugged all of that into 11 Labs, and the voiceover was spoken by AI to create what you heard there in the narration. Used an AI source for the music. Put all of that into Premiere after I generated all those images in Midjourney. So all of those were snapshots that AI created. I dumped them into another program to create the parallax, so like the camera was pushing in on it, and then assembled all of it. So anyway, I'm developing some training about how anybody can do that sort of thing as well, and then writing a book on AI and how we can use it in ministry.
Awesome. Technology is wonderful. It's a great tool that we can take advantage of to use. All right, good. Anything else, gentlemen, before we let Jason Moore go back to wherever he is?
I just want to say thanks for coming, but I also want to thank our 3 friends here, Phil and Michael and Steve, for the invitation to offer this training. And it's been great to spend a little time this afternoon together. Afternoon, my time anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. You're in Dayton, Ohio. And folks, if you need more information, just send us an email or just go to streamingchurch.tv. And we can reach out to you and we can help you with anything you need. And we can even connect you up with Jason a little bit more. All right, folks, thank you for being a part of this webinar. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you, Mr. Jason Moore. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
All right, folks, take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great day. I'm Phil Thompson.